Good Saturday afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to the Hurricane Hub off-season discussion for March 11th, Saturday, 2023. Let's get right on with it. First off, the countdown till June 1st. Of course, we'll be doing this every week now. Now that we're under the the 100-day threshold, and we're now at 82 days. I think last week we were at 89, just getting under the 90-day threshold. And next week will be even further into our countdown at 75 days, I believe, if you, of course, subtract 7 days from 82, which will be 1 week from now, of course, since we post every Saturday. You get what I'm trying to say. The bottom line is we're approaching hurricane season. We're under 90 days and soon to be under 80 days. So that does put into perspective hurricane season is on approach, and these next few weeks will be very important in the climatology world, of course, when it comes to tropics. Moving on, though, for a little bit, we're moving off away from the tropics in the northern hemisphere, and let's take a look at what's going on elsewhere, because there will always be, and I should say this more, there will always be cyclone activity across the globe somewhere, because we're in our winter right now, but it is summer right now and moving into fall in the southern hemisphere, and that is when we usually see the most activity here in the northern hemisphere. So it would make sense that there's stuff going on in the southern hemisphere right now as well. And one of those systems that are there right now is Cyclone Freddy. And if you've really been on top of this, if you really know what's going on with Freddy, quite a bit of records have been broken in the last few days associated with this storm. Broke the record for the longest lasting tropical cyclone ever recorded. We'll go over that in a little bit. And then there's, of course, this other area in the southern Pacific, Invest Area 99P, and maybe that'll become something in the next few days. We'll have to see. Although with Cyclone Freddy, as I did say, it is the longest living tropical cyclone on record. Did surpass Hurricane John, which was from 1994. That lasted 31 days. And Freddy has now lasted longer, and it is still a threat. It is a Category 2 cyclone and is headed towards Mozambique in Africa. So if you're in that area, obviously stay tuned, because you do have a threat ongoing right now. But it is with Freddy that we're seeing something, and of course it is March, and March there is their kind of summer to fall transition, like it is winter to spring there too. So it makes sense that we're seeing all this activity occur in the southern hemisphere right now. But moving away from that, since there really isn't much to talk about after that, maybe there will be in a few weeks, we'll have to see. But what is going on now in the northern hemisphere, moving back to where we are, of course, taking a look at the Pacific, the ENSO regions, noticing how it's been really warming up over the last few weeks, and we talked about this transition away from La Nina and transitioning more and more back towards a neutral pattern, and a lot of speculations of us transitioning to El Nino for this year. Noticing how, well, in response to that, we're seeing the Pacific really begin to warm up. Off the coast of South America has really warmed up over the last few weeks. If you remember back in January, this was all cold. Now it's all warm. And even that the cold patch that we've seen that's been lasting in the Central Pacific, that too has really begun to erode itself in the last few weeks. And now we're basically gone with any sort of cold, concentrated and widespread cold along the equatorial Pacific. So we are seeing that transition away from La Nina, like everybody said it would occur. But very interesting enough, I did mention this before, off the coast of the west coast of the United States, still cold. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is associated with a pattern very similar to what we see in the Atlantic. Basically, the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which, to put it into perspective, is basically kind of a oscillation or some sort of pattern that we see between a colder than normal Pacific to a warmer than normal Pacific, very similar to the AMO, the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation in the Atlantic. Both have the same general idea and context as to what they are, of course, just different basins. But the bottom line is it's cold, and the PDO does tend to have, the PDO and the ENSO do kind of go hand in hand with La Nina. So very interesting that we still have this cold, but of course, with the oncoming of warmer, and so we could see this maybe potentially warm up in the next few weeks. We'll have to see. But with the Nino 3.4 region, as I did talk about, it is beginning to warm up. We're now at negative zero point 0.1 degrees Celsius below normal. That is up from the last few weeks, which was negative zero point 0.5 degrees Celsius not long ago. So we're now out of this La Nina threshold, which is negative zero point 0.5, and we're now in the neutral threshold, so that does show a change. And the SOI2 has also begun to change as well. We're now at 6 points above normal, and if you're long enough here on this channel, you know that when we talk about SOI, we talk about how we usually talk about that being an influence on the atmosphere, at least in showing how the pattern is, at least in the Pacific, with how the atmosphere is behaving with La Nina. And if you're with us long enough with me on this channel here, you know how we talked about SOI. Usually the rule of thumb that I like to say for SOI is usually roughly when we get 7 points or higher, positive 7 points or higher, that usually is more or less a solid indication that the atmosphere is solidly responding to La Nina. And we've been tanking below that. Now we're at 6.65 points as of the 30-day average for today. So no longer above 7 points. So really does show that we are beginning to transition. The 90-day average, on the other hand, we're at 12 points with that. And the 90-day average does encompass basically the longer term impacts that we see with this atmosphere. And we're still in a more solid La Nina state with that. But we are beginning to see change. It is there. And in response to this change, the Climate Prediction Center has officially declared La Nina has ended as of Thursday. As of their ENSO update as of Thursday, they said ENSO neutral conditions are expected to continue through the Northern Hemisphere spring and early summer months of 2023. And they did show this map, which we'll show in a little bit. It does show the potential for El Nino to come along possibly as we head later into the year. But we'll go over that in just a few months. Not a few months, in a few minutes. Although we'll be watching this in a few months too, over the next few months as well, to see how this all progresses. Few minutes and months, well, we'll still be watching El Nino then. But now that we're seeing La Nina has ended and we're now kind of in a new atmospheric state, where do we go from here? So we're away from La Nina, like everybody said. One of the big important factors, now that we have La Nina out, but we will continue to watch this still because it pertains more closer to where we are in the Atlantic, or most of us are, that we're at least here for, is the SST temperatures in the Atlantic. And one thing I could say for sure is a lot of those places across the Atlantic are really warm, including the Gulf off the southeast coast. That has been well above normal for the entire winter. The Gulf is still very warm. Surprisingly so, up to 3 degrees Celsius, not only in some spots, but in quite a few spots in the Gulf of Mexico. We're basically at areas that are 2 to even 3 degrees Celsius above normal. So the Gulf has been warm the entire winter, and increasingly so, and this is very interesting, the eastern Atlantic off the coast of West Africa and in the tropical Atlantic, that area too has also begun to significantly warm in the last few weeks. And I really do take this as an interesting thing because usually, and if you remember the last few years, everybody was always talking about how we've had a warm Atlantic, at least in the January and February months. In the Atlantic, it was very warm off the coast of West Africa, but by the time we got to March, it has cooled down. But now we're here this year with March. It is March 10th, and we're almost halfway through the month, and soon we'll be in April. And the Atlantic has really begun to warm up significantly in the last few weeks. So it is not like we're in February or January where we're seeing a warm Atlantic, but we know that it could change because we're several months away from the season. We're still several months away from the season now, but the bottom line I'm trying to get at is we're closer, and this is happening in comparison to the last few years, we're kind of going in the opposite direction that we've went in the last few years, compared to this year. So this is very interesting setup that is going on there. But of course, we also have to take into consideration the Nino 3.4, the CFS V2, and other climate models showing that we do have potentially El Nino setup occurring. And for the last few weeks, as of today, El Nino, the CFS V2 at least, has been showing quite a potent El Nino potentially stirring up. I'm showing anomalies. This is the average of the whole entire mean, all the ensembles that are showing the different possibilities. The average of that is right near 1.5 degrees Celsius above normal. And we're talking about, when we talk about that, the equatorial Pacific, or at least a chunk of it, is on average 1.5 degrees Celsius above normal, and that is quite significant. And for the last few weeks, the CFS has been pretty consistent, pretty darn consistent, I must say, in showing quite a potent El Nino. And that even extends to the official NOAA Climate Prediction Center probabilities for El Nino too. I think they have up to a 63% chance for El Nino by the time we get to the end of the year. And if we take a look at all the other categories below it, they're all kind of more down there on the charts. And it really does show El Nino has the highest probability of occurring, at least for what the climate models say. But one thing I do need to mention is the fact that we do have a warm Atlantic. And I will say right now, and for those that know your history, do know what I'm talking about. There have been years in the Atlantic that we've had some sort of warm ENSO kind of stirring up, but on the Atlantic, on the other hand, has had a chance to warm up, and the Atlantic MDR was very warm, and that's led to some sort of, the best way to say it is some sort of competition in the atmosphere in who takes the majority of the convection and the rising motion in the atmosphere, or at least try to tell you is how much rising motion and how much energy there is, and how much of that energy will be dominant in being released from the oceans and into the atmosphere, or the atmosphere kind of balancing that out and taking the heat away from the ocean. Usually years that we've seen sometimes El Ninos on top of a warm Atlantic, those two would tend to compete. And sometimes in those last few years, and they've happened recently too, sometimes those years in the Atlantic, things would get interesting. And sometimes it would cause El Nino. I would notice sometimes those El Nino events would kind of be stunted or stagnated from kind of moving forward, and in turn, the Atlantic would tend to do some very interesting years, some very interesting things. And if you do know your history, you know what years I am talking about. So it really does. So the bottom line that I'm trying to say is, the next few weeks will really be crucial as to what occurs in the ENSO and how much the Atlantic warms up from here on. Does the warmth spread across the entire Atlantic? Do we see more of the warmth develop off the west coast of Africa? Does it spread through the rest of the MDR and also into the Caribbean too? And do we start getting a much more favorable look in the Atlantic than we do have already right now? Or do we see El Nino develop stronger and take over, and we kind of see things shifted the other way? It's we're approaching, once again, we're under the 90-day threshold, so we're under 3 months away from the season. We're getting closer, and I cannot stress enough, the next few weeks will be very important and very crucial as to how things set up, as to what occurs this season. And I do mention El Nino and the Atlantic. All these things will be very interesting to watch, and you gotta keep in tune, because sometimes we're in April and things start to dramatically change. This happened in the last few years, and I would think there could be some change coming in the next few weeks. So, with that being said, since we're getting closer towards the season, if you remember this website, the CIMSS Tropical Cyclones website, just to give you a little background, this is a website from the University of Wisconsin. They produce this website, and they have some very good graphics, of course, storm coverage, and of course tracking cyclones, not only in the Atlantic but across the globe. They also produce some really nice graphics that I like to show throughout the Atlantic hurricane season and leading up to the hurricane season, and one of that is the 850 millibar relative vorticity, which is what you see here. And if you're not sure what I mean by vorticity, that basically is showing the spin, the cyclonic spin that we have in the atmosphere, which is very, very important and really does show us perspective of how potent a system is. And that's a very big graphic that I like to pull up to show, for instance, developing systems, how they look, how their signature in the atmosphere is showing up, or even just tropical waves, just to see how potent they are and if they have any potential to develop in the future. And taking a look at the vorticity graph right now in the deep tropics between 10 and 20 degrees north, that's of course where the deep tropics are. Very interesting that I like to show is, you notice how there is not a lot of deep, relative vorticity out there right now. And keep in mind, it is only March, and March we're still transitioning from winter to spring. So notice how there's a lot of vorticity in the mid-latitudes and the subtropics. Very typical of this time of year. Most energy is confined there, but watch as I'll begin to show this graph in the next few weeks, since we are getting closer to the season. I just want to mention right now, watch how we'll really start to see a lot of this energy fade out, and a lot more energy in turn be pushed into the deep tropics, and the deep tropics begin to really fill up with a lot more vorticity in the next few weeks as we see more tropical cyclones, and of course conditions become much more favorable as we get closer towards the season. Another map, and of course this is a very big, especially short-term factor, especially when it comes to tracking storms as they're happening, is wind shear. And of course wind shear has some sort of climatology aspect too, since we have El Nino as a potential factor this year, and we know that El Nino, we do tend to see higher wind shear, at least in the deep tropical Atlantic. So this will be another very important factor. And of course, keeping on top of how conditions are in a developing system, because that is very important too. Wind shear is a very much of a make or break type of situation when it comes to how a storm develops, because we know that tropical cyclones, they like to stack up vertically in order for them to be well aligned and well developed. And when we have wind shear cutting across the top, that really blows the cloud tops away from developing a nice developed system. So wind shear is a very important factor, and this is a map that we'll be showing very closely as we go towards, as we get closer towards the season. And it'll also really be a big factor that we like to show, as to show how the atmosphere, changes as we move away from the winter months, which we have a lot of shear right now, which is why we really don't see development right now. And why right now is the off season, like we call it. The conditions in the atmosphere are not very favorable. Wind shear everywhere, dry air too, and we'll touch upon dry air in the coming weeks, as that will be another factor that we need to watch too. But this really does show perspective on how wind shear will begin to change over the next few weeks, and how to keep on top of that. Watch how the deep tropics will start to see a lot more of these greens, and a lot of these reds that we have right now will begin to fade away. But that is, of course, coming in the next few weeks. But it is March. It is still winter, depending on what you look at. The astronomical winter, we're still in that till the 20th, so that's roughly 9 days away. That will officially, on both ends, meteorological and astronomical, will be in spring. But as of right now, we are still transitioning away from winter, and we're transitioning into spring. So weather across the United States is still very much of a big staple as to what to track in the weather world right now. And we do have things that are ongoing. Blizzard warnings in effect for the north. Probably I'm going to see some heavy snow there. And winter storm warnings still in effect for northern central California. Really continuous precipitation that they've been seeing over the last few weeks. But I will continue to say it is going to help out in the long term, especially coming out of this huge drought in the southwestern Atlantic. Not the southwestern Atlantic, the southwestern United States, that includes most of California and states like Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and those places that really do see droughts. And we have been in a huge drought, especially over the last few months and years, especially due to La Nina. It really is beneficial for them to be getting all this rain, even though it is a lot at once. It really will help in the long term put a lid on the drought, and in some places help end the drought, as well as they'll be getting all the rain that they've been missing out on. But as for right now, we still have red flag warnings in effect for Texas and high wind warnings there, so watch out for potential fire danger. And of course, when it comes to winter weather too, we do have winter storm warnings in effect for the mountains of Utah and Colorado, so that does show an increase in precipitation we're seeing over the next few weeks coming up. And if we take a look at the severe weather front, we have a convective outlook for today. Slight risk in effect for today, and let's look at it on a closer front. Tornadoes, we have a 2% chance for that. Wind is at a 5%, and we have hail. Maybe could see some significant hail today. We'll see. If you're a storm tracker and take interest in that, maybe you'll be interested in what occurs today. We have a significant chance for hail, and then as we get towards tomorrow, tornado risk increased to 5%. So that is interesting. Wind, we're at 15%, and then hail, we have a significant chance for hail tomorrow too, and into day 3. We're looking at a marginal chance for severe weather for Florida, and then for the next few days, day 4 to 8. Not looking at anything too certain, at least for right now, but it is March. We are transitioning away from winter. We are going into spring, and spring is notoriously severe weather season, so of course we will see an uptick in severe weather, and of course severe weather right now. That is not a huge surprise. It is March, and I'm very sure in the next few weeks we will see much more of that come ahead and show front, because we are seeing things begin to change, and of course we are getting to the time of year where a lot more interesting things, of course, as I like to say, do begin to happen, that including severe weather season and hurricane season. As I've been saying, the next 2 weeks especially will be very crucial as to what the stage is being set for when it comes to the Atlantic. What factors are we looking at, and how the background state is beginning to develop too, because it is under 90 days, and as I do say, we're getting close to April, and we know April, that's when all the forecasts come out. We're already in mid-March, basically March 11th, and things are really beginning to take shape in the next few weeks, and whatever happens with El Nino and also what happens in the Atlantic will then be very crucial. But for today, I'm done. I'm gonna get out and enjoy my weekend, and I hope you do so too. If you like what you saw today, of course, as always, as I say every week, will really help if you like, subscribe, if you're new, of course, and share with family and friends, and most importantly, turn on those notification bells, because that's when you can get the notification up to the second when I post a video. So that'll not only be beneficial for growing the community, but especially during the season when I start doing live streams for developing systems or talks of potential for things to stir up. If you want to join and get the news and information from me right at the second, that'll be very beneficial too, and will really help us grow our community. But that is it for now. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and your weekend will be back next Saturday. Enjoy. Take care. See ya.